Good evening and welcome to the LaRouche Organization Weekly Battle Report. Today is Wednesday, August 20th. I'm Michelle Aaron, your host. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, wife of the late Lyndon LaRouche, said in an interview immediately following the Alaska summit of this past Friday, August 15th, between U.S. and Russian presidents Trump and Putin, that the summit was a major step toward normalization of relations between the world's largest nuclear powers. It was a breakthrough. Leading into the summit, and in fact over a 50-plus year history of organizing, the LaRouche movement has been working to create potentials for such breakthroughs, attacking the enemies of mankind, outlining solutions. We'll see in this evening's report many examples of the LaRouche movement playing this leadership role over just the past week, including through the activities of leaders of the LaRouche movement, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, Jacques Cheminade in France, Diane Sare and Kynan Thistlethwaite in the United States, and Harley Schlanger. We'll see some in-person field organizing, coverage in international media, a special cultural intervention, and a major initiative moving forward from here. First, let's watch an excerpt from an interview with Helga Zepp-LaRouche just yesterday on the program of independent analyst Kim Iversen, discussing the Friday Alaska summit and Helga's appeal that a meeting of world leaders, Trump included, at the upcoming September 3rd commemorations in China would signal to the world that we are reaching a new era of cooperation among mankind. This interview has over 60,000 views on Rumble, and we do include the link to the full interview in the video description.
This was a breakthrough. It looks like there might be an end to the war. It looks like there might be some normalization. What is your big takeaway from the meeting that Trump and Putin had in Alaska?
Well, as you say, there is a much larger picture involved, and that is that if the two largest nuclear powers are at odds, then, in a situation which actually was a reversed Cuban Missile Crisis, because, with the permanent egging on by the side of the British to send more long-range missiles to Ukraine, to even attack the early warning system in Russia, which really brought us more to the edge of a Cuban crisis than most people have been aware. And if that is being reversed, and now basically a direct channel has been established between President Putin and President Trump, as you say, the whole world, at least those people who are not insane, should be extremely exuberant and happy, because, this is the existence of humanity which is at stake. But obviously, the so-called coalition of the willing, and mainly the media, have turned out to be on a war path which is, unrelenting. If the next steps are taken and Zelensky will talk to Putin, which is what it seems to be the case, and then as a further step, President Trump is willing to talk to both Putin and Zelensky, I think there is a real chance to end this horrible war, to, bring it to an end and prevent it from an escalation. Right now, I think we are at an absolute branching point in history. And let me just say this, I have written an appeal to three presidents, President Xi Jinping, President Putin, and President Trump, where I urge President Xi that he absolutely should invite President Trump to attend on the 3rd of September, the 80-year anniversary of the end of the Second World War in the Pacific. If President Trump would just say, the fight against Nazism was so important. If he would go to Beijing where also a lot of other leaders will participate, like Modi from India, maybe President Lula from Brazil, and maybe some others will also be there. That would be just an important sign to the whole world that the large powers of the world can cooperate. And I know that since so many people were really afraid that we were on the verge of World War III, this would send the strongest message possible, that we are reaching a new era of cooperation. And I think that is what, if your viewers and you agree, then please sign my appeal, get it around, because we have to really, get a drumbeat of people supporting this idea.
And the Schiller Institute is releasing today the names of 96 prominent signatories from 36 countries of this appeal, the urgent appeal to Presidents Xi Jinping, Donald Trump, and Vladimir Putin. Signers include such notable policy figures as former President of Guyana, His Excellency Donald Ramotar, Dr. Georgi Toleraya, who, among many titles, is the executive director of the Russian National Committee on BRICS Research. There's also an active member of parliament, 4 former members of parliament, 9 high-ranking retired military officers, 4 retired senior diplomats, 2 members of the VIPS, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and leading figures in Pax Christi, among other peace organizations. So you can find a partial list already published on this from last week's Executive Intelligence Review Journal that you see here. The updated list with a few more of these wonderful signers will be issued with a press release momentarily by the Schiller Institute. And this call for this meeting has taken on a special significance in the wake of the Trump-Putin meeting. Though Western and media and political circles have attempted to reduce Friday's summit to the issue of Ukraine, it in fact opened the door to a wide array of economic and strategic initiatives, including such large infrastructure projects as the long-discussed proposal of a tunnel under the Bering Strait between Alaska and Siberia. So we're going to look now at a couple of items of street organizing. First, in France. We have some photos from a street deployment there near Monge Place over the weekend. You can see some of the signs. One of them says, "Peace will pass through the Bering Strait," with a world map centered on the North Pole. There's a sign denouncing genocide, calling for the Oasis Plan. Another side denouncing that Gaza is the Hiroshima horror before our eyes. And at that street deployment, many people stopped to talk who were concerned about Gaza. Others stopped because they know Jacques Cheminade, the leader of our movement in France, and they wanted to hear more from him. You saw in the pictures, he was out there in person talking to people, and they were quite happy to meet him in person. One woman actually ordered on the spot, maybe you can see here this picture of Jacques Cheminade's new book titled "Responding to the Cry of the People," although in French. One woman pre-ordered a copy on the spot. Everyone watching right now, if you can read French or know someone who can and you want to order them a copy, you can pre-order today through the Solidarité et Progress website. We include a link in the video description, and the book will be in bookstores on October 15th of this year. Again, this new book by Jacques Cheminade is called "Responding to the Cry of the People." Now to Texas in the United States over the weekend, where you see John there doing some campaigning with a bunch of beautiful signs and literature talking to passers-by. A couple of the signs read, Putin, Trump, and Xi must meet on September 3rd. Alaska Summit, build the Bering Strait now. And one with a very big map of the whole world, the US, Russia, and China can end war and poverty. So let's move forward now and look at 2 educational programs that we did over this past week to put necessary ideas on the table. Last weekend, organizers in the New York City area organized a special showing of the film 8:15 Hiroshima, From Father to Daughter. The film, directed by J.R. Heffelfinger, was shown, and a special panel of speakers that included the film's author, Dr. Mikamo, retired CIA analyst Ray McGovern, and Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who was there via the internet. They held a dialogue with the audience. Kynan Thistlethwaite, one of the key organizers of the event, will tell you about it.
Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to share with you a very meaningful event that we just held in New York City, actually just last Saturday, with Dr. Akiko Mikamo, who is a Japanese psychologist and filmmaker, someone who's been collaborating with the Schiller Institute for a while, and she's taken to the task of telling people the story of her father, Shinji Mikamo, who had survived the Hiroshima bombing while being right in the epicenter of the blast. And Dr. Mikamo tells this story very well in her film 8:15 Hiroshima, From Father to Daughter. We gathered about 80 or so people in a high school auditorium to watch the film and then participate in the discussion with Dr. Mikamo, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, Ray McGovern, and Eddie Toro, who is the actor who played Shinji's father in the film, and also John Steinbach. But I think the main aspect of the discussion to share with all of you is the film's focus on the impact of forgiveness and empathy. In the discussion, Ray McGovern had spoken about the dehumanization of the Japanese people, the Japs, as we call them, as what led people to justify to themselves that this barbaric action needed to be taken. Helga Zepp-LaRouche said that in order to start a new era of human civilization, where we're moving from confrontation to cooperation, it requires exactly the spirit Dr. Mikamo was talking about, of being able to have empathy with all the positions of your opponents, because it's that lack of empathy. It's the idea that you're right no matter what, that you have the cause to go for revenge, that continues the cycle of violence. And with the existence of nuclear weapons, this cycle has to end. I spoke with quite a few people who had attended the screening, and what meant a lot to them was the fact that Shinji had decided not to blame Americans for the dropping of the bombs. And he didn't do it because he thought it was justified, just the exact opposite. But he knew that if the Japanese people were to move on ahead with their lives, they couldn't have hate in their hearts. And that's exactly what we mean, I think, when we talk about a new paradigm, when we talk about economic development being the new name for peace. So I would just emphasize that people watch the film, that they do their own events, they host their own film screenings, and bring it to people in their neighborhood, whether they're political or not, whether you disagree with them or not, because it cuts right through all that nonsense, and it gets to people emotionally, and it shows the true goodness of humanity.
I have watched this film, and you are encouraged to do so as well if you have not yet. We include a link to where you can watch it in the video description. I imagine you can also look it up by the title, 8:15 Hiroshima, From Father to Daughter. Now, last Friday night, LaRouche Organization President Diane Sare had on her Symposium program Richie Freeman, an economics writer with LaRouche, to put meat on the bones of the idea of the Bering Strait proposal. The program was titled, "The Bering Strait Tunnel Will Change the World." It was a wonderful program. We'll watch now some elements of Richie's presentation.
I would say right now that what we're looking at and we're going to see is a little space, no more than 70 miles, separating the Western Hemisphere from the Eastern Hemisphere, up in the Bering Strait, where Alaska faces directly to Russia. So why should a 70-mile strait have such significance for the world? And why is it something that Lyndon LaRouche spoke so repeatedly about, and Helga LaRouche on the International Peace Coalition meeting today addressed as a pivot for what can be accomplished? And I think at this point, we have to just think in terms of physical economy. And by physical economy, I mean not just how many bricks you make, but how do you transform the entire world and all the economies in it, including the United States. Now, let me just locate this within the World Land Bridge, and you'll see in this updated version of the World Land Bridge, all the critical projects, many others, of course, hundreds of others, which we've documented in the New Silk Road becomes the World Land Bridge. But you'll see number one is the Bering Strait. You'll see its physical location up at the top. So that's where we're going to locate the Bering Strait, this tiny little distance of 70 miles, right? About 115 kilometers. And if you can look here, you'll see it. So Chukotka is in Russia, and you'll see Alaska, of course. And then you'll see it says the Diomede Islands. And that's the small Diomede, which you really can't even see, which is under the United States, let's say, oversight, part of the United States. And then to its left is the large Diomede. It would be built simultaneously with the North American Water and Power Lines. And you will see that they very much parallel each other because they both go up to Alaska. And you take the water from the Yukon and the Mackenzie Rivers basins and you send it down. We won't go through it here. We've done presentations of this. But he sees these as joint projects that you would do simultaneously. Let me also say, aside from sending goods back and forth, we're going to send natural gas. We're going to send electricity, fiber optic lines through the Bering Strait tunnels. These are going to be not just lines for the rail. The other thing, and I just want to show this is a project that Hal put forth the first 26,000 miles, and he had me work with him to take it up to 42,000 miles. We have a rail system in America, but which has to be linked, which we're just showing where it has to be linked to get up to Alaska. But we need to build high-speed rail and maglev. So it's going to call forth, it's going to cry out for, it's going to provoke finally building this U.S. network of 42,000 miles. So, and it will do so with every country that it touches, and also where the Chankay port is, and also what Transaqua is. Now you get a sense of what we're really doing through these little 70 miles.
Thank you, Richie. And really, the full symposium, there's much more. And we have tons of written material on these proposals, these projects as well. So we have a few more items of the LaRouche movement being covered on various news platforms over the past week. First, TLO spokesman Harley Schlanger did a prominent interview last Friday on the program X22 Report. The 45-minute interview covered the TLO white paper, Worse Than Treason, the actual motive behind Russiagate. It also discussed the proposal by Helga Zepp-LaRouche for the Bering Strait tunnel to be taken up at the Alaska summit. So the contents of the TLO white paper continue to be extremely important to anyone who truly wishes to drain the swamp. just yesterday, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard announced the revocation of security clearances from 37 current and former officials who had either politicized or weaponized intelligence, failed to safeguard classified information, or not followed certain standards. That's very, very good to start cleaning up, draining the swamp. But what was behind Russiagate? Why was Russia scapegoated when the real foreign intervention in the 2016 election came not from Russia, but from the UK? Harley addresses that in the excerpt that we are going to watch here.
You know, going back in time, we were talking about Russia, who was involved. And here we are. I mean, fast forward to today, and here we are. The evidence now is being declassified. The evidence is now coming out, and we're starting to see who the players actually are and what they've done. Of course, they're still denying it. They're pretending that this is all fake. But what's very interesting about all this, and I just want to ask you this question, is why do you think they chose Russia when they started this whole Russian collusion thing? Why did they pick Russia? Why didn't they pick North Korea? Why didn't they pick, some other country? Why was it Russia?
Well, this wasn't picked by people like Brennan and Clapper because they're sort of underlings. The ones that Tulsi Gabbard is exposing through declassified documents, they're sort of the puppets. The decision to go after Russia came from the City of London and Wall Street, the top financial oligarchs. And there's a reason for it, because they started targeting Russia as far back as the middle of the 19th century. And why was that? Well, the British Empire, which when you talk about the City of London or Amsterdam or Venice, the old empire, their wealth depended on control of trade routes, control of ports, and the ability to get other countries to have to deal with their currency. Now, Russia was always a problem for the British Empire because it's so large, it has so much raw material wealth. And in the modern period, of course, for a while it was communist, but under Putin, it's become a leader of a nationalist sovereign movement internationally. So the decision was made to weaken Russia because they saw Russia as a potential threat to the continuation of what was the neocon unipolar order. And it's the unipolar order that's crashing, and it makes them more desperate than ever to try to weaken Russia. Because if you have the United States and Russia in an alliance, and I think, Dave, historically, Russia was allied with us in the American Revolution, in the Civil War. They allied with us in the two world wars of the 20th century. If you have the US and Russia together, then the City of London can't play their games. They can't control things. And the whole idea of the global central banks was to keep the power in London and Wall Street. So that's why Russia was chosen. And the fact that Clapper and Brennan and these guys are about to get their due is wonderful. But we've got to also pay attention to who are the string pullers.
So this interview, which was conducted on Friday and has now over 140,000 views just on Rumble, the second half of it included the discussion of the BRICS alternative to break the control over trade and industry of the central banks, which banks are right now operating as agents of monetarist speculators who are running too big to fail private banks, hedge funds, and insurance companies. Now to the TASS news article from the day following the Friday Alaska summit. Helga Zepp-LaRouche was interviewed immediately to get her assessment of said summit. The article's title captured the main thrust of Helga's response: Alaska Summit, a major step toward normalization between largest nuclear powers, says expert. And I believe this was published in both English and Russian. And one quote from the article from Helga says, "The best plan of action would be if the successful diplomacy of Alaska would be followed up by an invitation of President Trump to the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II on the 3rd of September to the military parade on Tiananmen Square in Beijing. This would allow him, together with President Xi Jinping, Putin, and many other leaders of the global South, to send a powerful signal to the world that the leading nations are moving away from confrontation to cooperation, and in this way inaugurating a new era of mankind. Now to a Brazilian news coverage where we were covered for our economic ideas. The Monitor Mercantil, the daily newspaper read by nationalist business circles around Brazil, published on August 18th the opening summary section of Dennis Small's new EIR article, How Should the BRICS Respond to Trump's Crypto Tariffs? And the article includes a link to Dennis's full article in English, an article which is quite in-depth, and I'm sure it is well worth reading. Here's a small excerpt that they put in their initial article in Portuguese, but I will read it in English. They say, quoting Dennis Small, "To put the matter another way, if money were wealth, the law of the jungle, a zero-sum game, would in fact be scientifically correct. As the monetarists argue, my gain is your loss. Entropy prevails, and war is a certain outcome. But money is not wealth. True wealth comes from advances in the productive powers of labor as a result of man's creativity, as Lyndon LaRouche proved. And for that reason, the law of the jungle is scientifically false. We actually live in a universe that is not a zero-sum game, a world in which everyone can win. Anti-entropy prevails." So we've seen this evening a concert of various instruments, different platforms, activities, many performers, leaders, and members of the LaRouche movement, all working in harmony toward the objective of creating a world of peace and development. We saw high-level alternative media platforms taking very seriously the analysis and proposals of Helga Zepp-LaRouche, Harley Schlanger, and Dennis Small. We saw the work of organizers in the streets in both France and Texas, USA, to reach out and talk to real people. And we saw on programs that TLO President Diane Sare and LaRouche activist Kynan Thistlethwaite helped bring into being the effort to educate the minds and hearts of our population. So we appeal to you, organize with us in the coming week. If you haven't yet, sign Helga's urgent appeal petition and get more people to sign as well. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next